Live streaming starting now.
Thanks, Fred. We could go ahead and open the room and let people come in and spend an extra minute signing in the chat box if you like.
Starting now.
Thank you, Fred. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. So excited to have you here with us today. We are a couple minutes early, so as you're coming into the room, please introduce yourselves in the chat box. We would love to know who's here with us today and where you are, maybe what your role is. So don't forget when you type anything in the chat box that the default goes to the hosts and panelists. And so you need to change it to everyone so that we can all see your messages. So welcome. Take a second and sign in. Hi, Jill. Jill is in Newark Public Schools, parent engagement. Love that. Stephanie is here from Washtenaw. I know I'm mispronouncing that. I'm so sorry, Stephanie. I see Emily from Nebraska. Hi, Emily. Susan Hahn. Oh, hi, Sue. It's lovely to see you again. We have Janelle, Tracy, lots of people signing in now, people from Maine and Texas, Arizona. Just as a reminder, my name is Sherry Wilson. I'm the Senior Director of Training and Engagement here at the National Association for Family, School, and Community Engagement. You are in the session Setting Assumptions Aside, Lessons for Deeper Family Engagement, which is going to be a great session. Remember, if you have questions today, put those in the Q&A box. Sometimes, as you can see right now, the chat box is a fast-moving stream, and we might lose your questions if you try and put them there. So use the Q&A box. We're going to be circling back to that at the end. And also remember to change the drop-down on your chat menu to everyone so that everyone will see your messages. Otherwise, it defaults to hosts and panelists, and you've got some really good things to say. We want to make sure everybody can see that. So with that being said, we are going to go ahead and get started today. To start, I would like to introduce my friend Nikivier, who is beautiful and talented and going to share with us a little bit about our partner Cafe, who is a partner on these webinars. Nikivier?
Hi, Sherry. I didn't expect all of that. Thank you. So welcome, everybody. I am Nikivier, as Sherry said, and I am on the Cafe team. Cafe is a collaborative action for family engagement, and we are a project of MAEC. We are the statewide family engagement center for Maryland and Pennsylvania. We are the only statewide family engagement center that holds 2 states. We help build sustainable infrastructure to support healthy family, student, and community engagement. Cafe serves all educators from state agencies to school districts to school staff and early child care providers and families to promote high-impact, culturally responsive family engagement. And we are delighted and honored that you all are here today. I will pass it on back to Sherry.
Thanks, Nikivier.
Yeah.
So just a reminder as we start that today we are actually going to be hearing some really great stuff. This is a session that's going to focus on lessons for deeper family engagement. And this webinar really brings our core competencies into action in some really concrete ways. So on the screen, you can see a QR code. If you haven't yet already, make sure you take a picture of that, scan it, and download the core competencies, as these competencies were developed through an intense 3-year process in partnership with our members, many parent leaders, practitioners, and policymakers. And as you read about these competencies, you'll see that they fall into 4 domains: reflect, connect, collaborate, and lead. family-facing professionals reflect when they look inward and develop their cultural humility, embrace equity, and respect and value the diversity of families. They connect when they build trusting relationships with families based on mutual respect, and they foster social networks among families and communities. They collaborate when they amplify those relationships to co-construct curriculum, programs, services, and policies with families to expand student learning and development and communicate about academic progress. And family-facing professionals lead alongside families when they take part in the broader field and advocate alongside families for systems change to champion equity. So today's webinar is an opportunity to learn a little bit more about things that fall into all 4 of these competencies. And not only are you going to learn some incredibly helpful things that you can do related to family engagement, but you're going to learn it from 2 of the brightest and most talented people that I know who have been with us in the past. They did a webinar with us last year that was really well received. So we asked them to come back and sort of do a deeper dive. So I'm going to introduce to you our speakers for today. We have Rebecca Honig and Jessica Webster.
Sherry, thank you so much for that introduction. It's so lovely. It's the best to be introduced by you. And thank you all so much for joining us for our talk on family engagements, assumptions made, lessons learned. This has got several interactive moments baked in, so get ready to jump into the chat because we'll be asking questions and we'll be asking you to reflect on things that are really working for you as we explore different topics. So I'm Rebecca Honig, and I am the Chief Content and Curriculum Officer at ParentPowered. We are the creators of Ready for K, which is an evidence-based family engagement program delivered via text message. I've been creating content to engage families for 2 decades. I spent years working at Sesame Street, first as a content specialist and then as a writer, creating scripts and guides and books and trainings for families across the world. And I've also developed dozens of family workshops and resources for places like Scholastic and PBS and many others. One of my favorite things I've had the chance to do is lead family workshops with families across the country. And I think that my favorite part of that work is really learning more about families' strengths and stories and unique perspectives. Lastly, but definitely not leastly, I am the parent of 3 kids. I have a 5th grader, a 7th grader, and a 10th grader. So on a personal level, I am getting quite a look at family engagement through the ages. And I'm joined by my amazing collaborator, Jessica Webster, Dr. Jessica Webster, I should say.
Thank you, Rebecca. And thank you all for joining us today. I am Jessica Webster, and I am actually from the Mid-Atlantic Equity Consortium, where I serve as a senior family engagement specialist on our CAFE team, which you heard about from my colleague, Nikki VA. Prior to this role, I served as a school administrator in both public and independent schools, where one of my main focuses has been on building community and family partnerships. And I really became fascinated by the disconnect between families and schools because, like Rebecca, I wear multiple hats here as well. I'm a parent of 3 children myself, one who's a junior in high school, a 7th grader, and a 3rd grader. And I noticed that my own experiences and those of my friends and peers did not match the engagement that I envisioned that I personally was creating in my professional life, and knew that my colleagues in other schools were trying to create too, especially at the secondary level, middle school and high school. So in other words, I recognized we were working really hard to bridge the gaps, but we're often still falling short from the perspective of our families, which was pretty demoralizing and frustrating for us as well. And so I chose to examine family engagement in the transition to middle school as the topic for my dissertation a few years ago. Rebecca and I have come to believe that often these disconnects are due to some bad habits or some assumptions that are made. And with that in mind, we've curated some stories today that we have experienced that really highlight where our assumptions may have led us astray and the learning that we have incorporated into our work. So with that, let's jump into our conversation today. All right. So we know that family engagement itself is a newer term. For many decades, the goal when it came to families was really family involvement. It was the idea of getting families to come in for parent conferences, attend events, about identifying school needs as a school, as a personnel, and then telling families how they could help us meet our needs as the school. And sometimes, or oftentimes, that required families physically showing up during school hours, meaning involvement typically emphasizes visible activities. And we have a few examples for that on the next slide. Oftentimes we're asking families to come in for parent conferences, right? Bake sales and fundraising events, STEAM nights, and come in and volunteer their time. And we want to start by saying that the research shows that any kind of increased parental interest and support for students can help. So it's not that these activities themselves are problematic or bad, or that we should stop doing them. But we do know from the research that family engagement, using the term engagement, and really making sure that we're engaging families in multiple ways is far more equitable, and it produces far greater results, not just for students from families, but for the school and the entire community. Family engagement itself involves a whole new set of activities because the end goal is forming partnerships with families. And it really involves that idea of listening and understanding the family's unique strengths, their needs, and their perspectives, and truly involves making decisions together by bringing families to the table as leaders and by building systems at both the district and school level. So we really like the Michigan graphic. They have a great graphic that shows the continuum of parent voice and leadership. And it's here that we can see that family engagement leads to family empowerment and partnership, and essentially paves the way then to opportunities for parent leadership, to parents and caregivers being a part of the team that helps define policy and practices that affect the school community. But we don't get there by accident. We get here through intentionally building systems, policies, programs, and evaluation and feedback tools with parent leaders. So as we shift to this way of thinking and doing, family engagement truly becomes a living, breathing thing. It becomes an act of forming a responsive relationship. And so when we think about it that way, the ingredients that make it good and that will make it work are the ingredients that make any relationship work, right? Listening, collaboration, and responding to each other's needs. And so we're going to take a second just to look at that quote on parent engagement and really saying that it is the ultimate goal of great schools, because it not only allows for the creation of better parent-school relationships and partnerships, but again, it has a tremendous impact on student achievement, which is why we're all here.
So thinking about that end goal and the ratio of teachers and administrators to families, this goal, right? It can be an extremely daunting equation. We know that the student-teacher ratio in upper elementary can be as high as 30-1. In high school, it is not uncommon for the guidance counselor to student ratio to hover around 500-1. I think the really good news is that there are practices that we can all put in place to really ensure that we have the best possible chance of connecting with families and partnering with families. And we're going to talk about some of those today. So we're going to really dive in and explore some of those practices. And we're going to do it by unpacking our own missteps. Or from a strength-based perspective, I will say we're going to unpack our own learnings. So what we're going to do is we're going to tell stories about times we made assumptions about families that actually got in the way of us paving a path towards partnership and towards forming those responsive, trusting relationships with families. And we'll look at what we did about it. We'll look at the tools we made and the steps we took based on the lessons that we learned. So let's just pop over and have a quick look at our goals for today. So you'll come away from our time together with tips and strategies and resources to help you bring family voice and perspective to the table, to break down some of those common barriers to engagement, and to really support families and collaborate with families in ways that are just right for them. Together, we have 40 years working in family engagement. So that's a lot of time to learn and make missteps and course correct. So we've got some fun stories to jump into. But before we do that, we just want to center ourselves in a core belief. And I'll just read this now. We need to believe that all families sincerely care about their children and will do everything they can to support them. So let's just spend a moment, all of us, just picturing the families we serve, their strengths, their unique perspectives, and all that they do for their children. All right. Jessica has our first story today. It is called Pandemic Pandemonium, and it is all about her journey learning to go from passive to proactive family feedback. Take it away, Jessica.
All right. So when Rebecca and I first started talking about some stories and experiences we had, this one came to mind partly because it was so fresh, right? We're just finally coming out of this funk of the pandemic. And I think it's easy to remember those first feelings in the days when we weren't quite sure what we were supposed to do. And it was supposed to be a 2-week break, but we were going to be home, and it ended up lasting a lot longer. And at the time, I was running a school that didn't have an awful lot of technology infrastructure, and we were scrambling very quickly to figure out how we were going to do remote learning from home, as were lots of other people. I think we can all remember those feelings and experiences we had when the pandemic hit, but I do want to caution you in saying that while this does take place during the pandemic, I think that as we've moved into post-pandemic, there's a lot of lessons that can still be applicable to the work that we're doing today that have nothing to do with pandemics or medical teams or online learning. So as we began, I was about 6 to 8 months in my new role as a head of school for an independent school. And as I mentioned, we didn't have a whole lot of technology infrastructure. That was something that I was brought in to help build, but hadn't gotten it quite done within the 8 months. And as many of you probably know, the guidance for schools and structuring of schools was really delayed. So the response to COVID really didn't feel systemic. And a lot of school leaders in my networks are feeling kind of confused and unsure of what to do, and really felt that they were left to determine their course of action in separate pockets, right? So as many of my colleagues did, I started to turn inward to other school leaders and to my educators in my building to determine what others were doing, what my teachers wanted to do, how we wanted to structure the day. But remember that I was completely new to this community. So my desire to be in line with my colleagues also needed to be balanced with my desire to build rapport with my teachers. But what I didn't really take into full account at the time, admittedly, was the needs of all the families, right? So we thought if we build it, this will work for everybody. And within weeks of designing our plan, I had emails, I had phone calls from families that were full of questions, in many cases lodging their frustrations and sometimes outright discontent with the plans that we had made. People would call me and talk in terms of, well, everyone I talk to agrees with me, or I've talked to lots of families and no one's happy with your plan. It was really disconcerting and upsetting. And my first impulse was really to react to this new data and panic, right? And say, oh my gosh, we've got to throw it all out and start from scratch.
Oh, I feel this. And I think this is so common, right? Because when there's change and families start vocalizing their opinions, oftentimes it is the most traditionally, historically vocal and empowered and comfortable with school systems parents that you hear from first. So I'm curious what you did with that feedback, but also to expand the network of parents that were chiming in.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that I've learned throughout my career, because I've done a lot of work in special education and really in that whole idea of de-escalating tensions, is that oftentimes by the time we're hearing from people when they're in crisis, they're not saying things nicely to us, right? And there's a lot of passion and emotion in their voice. And this time in particular, everybody was feeling escalated. So I did take kind of a deep breath to really decompress a little bit And I began by thinking, is the data in front of me the only data, right? Is everyone really this upset? I think I need to do some more work. So recognizing early on that I didn't know what to do or what the course should be, I figured the best thing to do first before moving forward is to make sure that I'm gathering information. And that my initial information is one flag, one piece of data, one source of data, but it's not the only one. I don't think that I've heard from a variety of stakeholders on this, right? Only those, again, who felt empowered to speak up or were at the point of frustration where they just couldn't be quiet any longer, right? So I wanted to make sure that they weren't talking for everybody. And in order to course correct, I began gathering some data in a myriad of ways. The first one was that we conducted surveys by grade level to determine how families and students were faring, along with an offer to follow up with a face-to-face conversation if the parent wanted to put their name on the record. So the surveys themselves were anonymous, but then there was a section at the end that said, if you'd like to tell me more, or if you have some feedback for us, leave the best time and number to reach you and your name. And then I followed up with all the families who said they wanted to get feedback. And from that, we looked for patterns, what was going well and where, because there were things that were going well with the system and there were families that were happy with what was happening, right? And were there specific grade levels or instructional styles that were not translating well online? And how could we help those teachers and those grade levels move towards the areas that were working? How could we move more towards what was being successful? It also gave us an opportunity to ask families, what do you need? Technology support, tutoring, mental health check-ins, or would you even be willing to be a leader and a parent mentor for another family during this time? Because some of our families were asking, what can we do to help other people, right? And so what ended up happening is these surveys eventually morphed into a trimester and end of year checkpoint. Even post-pandemic, where we began really checking in with people to say, how are things going so far? Just a quick check-in. What's working, what's not working? What do you wish we would have done to prepare you for the upcoming school year? What do you still have questions about? What did you love about this year, right? And then we also integrated a climate survey into our annual measures to give everyone multiple opportunities and with multiple data points to weigh in. Then I already mentioned from the survey, we asked people who wanted to participate in a focus group. So as we returned to school and still had families online, we did focus groups for the online families to talk about how's the online hybrid mess working for you, right? And what can we do to make it easier for you? And then when we all moved back, those turned into coffee chats or virtual opportunities for small group input. We also created an advisory team of parents. So initially, we gathered families who had experience in public health or medicine, and that was invaluable for helping me create a weekly, bi-weekly, and eventually monthly newsletter that talked about the data in our region from a public health standpoint, how we translated that into what that means for schools and the decisions we were making for schools to make sure that we had the healthiest classrooms available for reentry. And one of the things that's really taught me is often I had thought about advisories as being these long-standing, they have to, like you always have an advisory and you do the same things with the advisories all the time. But what this really taught me is after the pandemic, we didn't need that advisory anymore. And so one of the things I learned is advisories can also pop up for a specific issue, or if you're thinking about a new initiative. That you can bring some parents together who have diverse viewpoints or represent something, that they have expertise on, that can really lend that level of credibility to the work you're doing proactively, and they can help inform the direction. They're a great complement to surveying and focus groups as well.
So what I'm hearing is that even though this was set in a particular moment in time, it really was the catalyst for the creation of all of these really rich and ongoing feedback loops that have the potential to bring so many more voices to the table as you're making decision and to lead to these new points of connection and collaboration. And I'm wondering, when you step back and look at the key things you learned and implemented, what are things that all of us can do in our work to kind of create these feedback loops and that are more equitable and inclusive?
Yeah, I think the main takeaway for me from all of this is something that's really easy for people to implement. I mean, I always pride myself on having an open door policy and being open for people who have concerns, but that really relies on people taking the initiative to come to me. I'm not seeking out information. And that can be a real blind spot for teachers and administrators because we think, well, if we haven't heard from everybody, everybody's happy, right? And what we found out is, yes, some people are. And some people really aren't, and they just don't have a means or the wherewithal to do that. So a couple of things that I think that we need to make sure that we're able to do. And the first one of that really is making sure that we're aware of the power dynamic at play here. So research really shows that parents who are explicitly invited and encouraged to take part in their child's education are way more willing to do so, and they feel confident that their participation can have an impact. And so we have a slide that really talks about that and talks about that wheel of power. And what I really like about that is the idea that we all fall somewhere on this wheel of where we fall in society at any given time, right? You can be a teacher and you can be on one part of the wheel, and a parent could be on a different part. And so being very well aware of those cultural things that may be happening for families and where they may perceive that they fall on the wheel, but also understanding that schools in general hold a large amount of power, regardless of where we fall on that wheel as individuals, right? Schools themselves are really the power brokers in these experiences. We also want to make sure that we're really aware and cognizant that different people have a different experience coming into schools. So it can be challenging for a family of English language learners or immigrant students to interact with their child's teachers in schools. Some of this may be due to a language barrier that would deter parents and caregivers from engaging, but there's also cultural differences. Like in some cultures, asking for questions of the school seems disrespectful. And on another hand, when you're asking questions or you're having an issue, sometimes it kind of makes you feel stupid, right? Like, I'm the only one that's having this problem. It must just be me. It's embarrassing for me to say I can't log into the student information system, right? It just makes me feel stupid. And then we also have some families who hold beliefs that having a struggling learner or a child with a disability is not something that we should be talking about. There's a real stigma around that. And so we really need to be cognizant of those things and understand that that doesn't mean that things are working for you just because you don't come to the table. So in other words, what I learned from this was that families who are struggling during the pandemic with our new learning platforms often assumed they were the only ones. And there was a lot of shame and guilt around admitting that they were not finding success. They felt like they were failing their children, and they felt like they were going to annoy me by calling and asking for help. That's the last thing I wanted them to do. So we want to make sure that we always respect that when families bring forward a concern, whether it's in a survey or whether it's face-to-face or by phone call or an email, that they're really showing vulnerability. And that if we're not meeting that with empathy, then a family is much less likely to pursue that sharing again. So I think there's a couple things that came out of this story for me that I think really are somewhat easy to resonate. And I think that it really comes with building a culture of continuous improvement. And really making sure that our families know that we're invested in that. And that means building systems for feedback and data. And that can take the shape of surveying anonymously, but often not long surveys, just short little snippets to kind of get the temperature of what's happening. And asking for volunteers who would be willing to serve on a focus group. And teachers can do this at the end of a unit if they've done a really big project-based learning. How did this work for you? How did this homework assignment work, right? It can be quarterly. It can be beginning and end of the year. How did the start of the school year go for you? How was the transition to high school? What do you wish we would have done differently, or what would have helped you better? I think school climate measures are essential, and I'm not sure enough schools do them, because that gives you a really great sense of how parents perceive and feel about the environment, and students and teachers, and where the intersection is with what could potentially be an issue moving forward. And so I think the last piece is really making sure that you're creating focus groups from data that are diverse, that you're getting diverse viewpoints from people, that you're able to really understand what's happening in your community and what the needs of your community are.
So just want to open it up now for folks here with us to share practices that they've put in place. Something, as you're putting in your ideas, something that I've been thinking about is, can we create a +1 culture? And what I mean by that is, if you're going to a meeting, whether it's an admin meeting or a planning meeting, can everyone invite a parent or a caregiver or someone from the community who might represent a group that is traditionally or historically hard to get to the table? That's something that I've been thinking a lot about lately. Go ahead and put in the chat, because we can really be learning from each other. We have so many brilliant people on this call. If you have any ideas.
I see a good one here, Rebecca, in that there's a comment in the chat that says, volunteers don't always step up. Some are waiting to be asked up. And that includes, they may not even know what skills that they may not even realize or recognize their own skills and strengths that they can bring to the table. And so I think that's a really important thing, that we create that culture and that we're constantly asking people to participate in and recognizing them.
I'm also noticing in my own life, persistence counts when it comes to asking people. If someone asks me once, sometimes I don't always respond.
Okay.
Follow up and ask again and send me that email that just has the question mark, like, did you get my ask? It's effective.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's definitely counts.
Yeah, including student voice is essential. And I would say, sometimes I think we think of that solely for high school students. I think elementary students should have their, I think when you do school climate surveys or you do surveying, that they have a real sense and they'll be real honest with you about what's happening. Even as young as kindergarten, there are ways to do that, or preschool. So I think that's really essential. Yeah.
I love someone's putting in student voices as well as their parents. Absolutely. I mean, talk about stakeholders. These decisions are most directly affecting them. And a great idea earlier, just about, finding those existing moments to chat with people. Jessica, I just heard you go, so what?
Yeah, I love what Kimberly put in about her admin retreat, where they invited a bunch of parent leaders and the administrators weren't allowed to speak. They just had to listen. I think that is so powerful. I'm stealing that as a suggestion for the schools that we work with. I think that's amazing. Yeah, that's wonderful.
I see someone who's plants themselves at the door as people come in for drop off to have chats and get feedback. That's great.
Yeah, and I think, we have to be careful, and I think this is mentioned in the chat. We need to be careful that we're not always asking the same parents. When I'm stressing the word diversity, I truly mean that. It's not the same parent leaders all the time, or, where some schools will pick the parent who's also the teacher and can check the box for being the parent in the meeting. I think sometimes we've seen that happen. So we want to make sure that, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, but always looking at who's missing from the table and who do we need to include and how do we get them there, right? Because sometimes that's the barrier, is that's building that sense of trust before we can even get them to the table. All right, so let's move on to story number 2, and we'll come back for some more discussion. Rebecca, I think the next story belongs to you, and it is a really powerful story about scaffolding family engagement for the families that we work with. So I'm going to ask you to jump right in because I can't wait to hear it.
Will do. All right. So a little over a year ago, I was part of a resettlement team that was helping a newcomer family from Afghanistan through their resettlement process. And I had eagerly volunteered myself as very well positioned to be the education lead. So that made me the person who was tasked with helping the family register for school and sign up for school-based services and school-based meetings, and really orienting them around what their school experience would be like. So at our first school meeting, which was held around the kitchen table of their temporary housing, I decided that the very best thing to start us off would be to do a deep dive into everything that their 4 children would be learning. After all, we have amazing schools, and I could not wait to communicate the exciting curriculum to them. So my plan, which I charted out, was to chronologically move through all the grades, orienting them around everything that their children would learn over the course of the year. And my plan, since it was chronological, was to start with the exciting literacy skills their soon-to-be kindergartner would be learning. So I think I probably, knowing myself, started in with something like, well, when it comes to literacy, kindergarten's all about building a love of books and comprehension and phonemic awareness. And I got like one sentence in when the father, Shafi, kindly stopped me. And he said, wait, Rebecca, what days does school meet in this country? And it was like a total record scratch, stop the train moment for me, in which I took a deep breath.
Yeah, it just makes you think about how we as schools set the priority, right? Or we as educators are setting the priorities and the agendas for our conversations with families without even thinking about, does this even fit in with what they need right now?
Yes, that is 100% what I was doing. And I was actually adding a fair amount of stress, totally unnecessary stress. So I had made assumptions about their background knowledge. There was really critical information they needed. And it's sort of like I had gone about, right, like making an ice cream sundae by dropping in the cherry before I'd put in any ice cream. It just kind of like rolled around there on the bottom without anything to actually hold it in place. The good news is that this moment really snapped me into a listening state. So I asked about school in Afghanistan. We talked about similarities and differences based on the things they were bringing up and the context and understanding that they had built off of their lived experiences in their home country. And this led us to totally shift the conversation. We looked at the school calendar together. We defined the terms, right? What was a half day? How did we even define the school week? We talked about mixed gender classrooms, which was totally new to them. We talked about parent-teacher relationships, which was also totally new to them. We talked about attendance. We talked about lunch. You know, there was a whole sort of rich landscape of topics that we really needed to discuss before we were even going to touch the curriculum.
This reminds me a lot of the research by Hahn and Love that categorizes immigrant parents as moving through 4 stages of parental engagement. And that really is cultural survivor, cultural learner, cultural connector, and cultural leader. And so that level of involvement depends on parents' needs and their skills and their interests. And so it's so essential that we're recognizing where families are in this experience. And so by doing that, you were then able to really meet them where they are in the level of support that they needed. Beautiful. We can't scaffold without relationships and understanding culture and skill sets and priorities. So what advice would you give others to successfully scaffold engagement?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all have to really think about chapter 1 of family engagement. And to do that, we really need to start by asking ourselves some core questions. Like, what does family engagement look like for this family? What do they already know? What are their hopes and dreams for their child? What are their expectations? What does this family need in order to engage in our school, right? These questions are going to lead you to a much more full understanding of family strengths and perspectives. When we think about that family engagement partnership, right, this is the information that's going to orient you around all of the unique things that this family brings to the table. Now, I do want to acknowledge, though, that these can be really tricky questions to get answers to, right? But I think there are things we can do to make it a little bit easier, right? So first off, we all know, right, meeting with families is ideal, whether it's during a home visit, school orientation, or a strength and needs assessment. But if possible, for any meeting, we want to partner with an agency that already has a trusting relationship in place whenever possible. This might be a local health clinic, a resettlement agency, a cultural center, or a faith-based organization. They might be present for the meeting or just kind of collaborate in prepping the family beforehand. This is going to go a long way to help build comfort with a new family so that they're more ready to share and have a bit more context going into it. You can also, these same organizations, right, you can seek out general information from these same local agencies ahead of any meeting. For example, your local immigrant center or your housing agency might be able to talk to you about trends they're seeing in terms of newcomers and the types of experiences they may have had before joining your community, because this information is going to go a long way towards informing the interactions you have with a new family. So towards that end, let's say you want to know more about a family's needs and what family engagement looks like to them, and you can't meet one-on-one or engage a local organization to orient you. Great information is still available. So two resources that I really love and rely on, OECD and UNICEF, both allow you to search by country to learn more about that country's general profile. For example, what is their state of education? What are women's rights like in that country? These are sort of pieces of information that are going to help you form a picture about what their past educational experiences may have been like. You might also get in the habit of attending local cultural events or connecting with other families who share lived experiences with your newcomer family to learn more about those new families that you are welcoming. But I want to also return to that initial bulleted list, and you see that we've circled one here, because that last bullet is actually something you can begin to act on even before you meet the family or anyone who knows anything about the family or the family's culture. And it's that, what does this family need in order to engage in our school? So when I think back to that initial meeting with Shafi, one of my biggest realizations was, wow, school comes with so much logistical information, so many systems. Now, because I grew up going to school in the US, these systems were invisible to me. I never had to learn them. I inherited them. But this is not true for so many families. Families who also grew up here, families who, had all different experiences with their own schooling, and we can't make assumptions about this basic understanding. And to be honest, one thing I noticed as I was giving him advice on doing things like navigating the school calendar and signing up for services, I was thinking, oh my gosh, I should start doing some of this stuff myself. So where I'm going with this is, consider making the assumption that all families need some basic orientation around school-based systems in order to engage. We're all stressed. We are all overwhelmed. Even those of us who are well-oriented around school in the US could use a refresher. And one tip you can apply is try peppering that refresher with useful tips and tricks so that all families find the information useful. So an example of this would be as you're orienting families around how to call in an absence, just remind them to save the number for the front office in their phone so it's easy to do, right? That's a tip that all of us could benefit from. Or as you orient them around how you'll be reaching out to them with information, suggest they choose a time of day that they'll scan their email for anything sent from the school, right? It's a really applicable habit that we can all be working on building and all benefit from. So I just want to also just say that as a result of the experience with Shafiq, and if we go to the next slide, one thing we did is we created a Welcome to School in the US mini book. And you can see some of the topics we covered, like navigating the calendar, the school website, drop-off and pick-up procedures, ways to communicate with the school, school-based terms, and how to ask for help. We can share this with everyone, but I think sort of highlighting these really essential topics as things we need to universally orient families around to set them up for strong engagement is really, really something we could all be doing together.
That's wonderful. And MAEC has a few resources related to supporting multilingual families to make sure that they understand their rights and responsibilities as well. So we have a publication called Adelante Moving Forward, and it's really a great resource for schools and community organizations to use with families to help them understand and navigate the school system so we can build that family efficacy and advocacy skills in our families. All right, so those are some ideas that we have, but this is a great time to hear from all of you. What are some things that you've learned or that have worked for you? using parent squared for communication to post or direct. Yeah, right. It allows you to choose your language, which is super important. That ability to translate materials in real time is so powerful for us and for families. Yeah, thank you for that, Jordan. Yeah, and I see Martha mentioning, sometimes what we need to build is that skill set, which is something that Adelante really works towards, is that idea of how do we help families become advocates for their children in a way that they feel comfortable? And Rebecca and I were actually talking about that this morning as we were kind of reviewing our presentation for today, but making sure that we talk to parents so that we can help them. I had a conversation with a parent earlier today where we talked about, okay, you need to go in and be able to share, I don't want the world. I just want these things. These are my hopes and dreams for my child, or this is what I would like to see happen when my child is in your classroom, right? And how do we get there together? And making sure that we're doing it that way so that they don't feel that it has to be a confrontation to get their conversation in. And so, yeah, families absolutely need some skills in understanding rights and responsibilities, and also in some of that, managing tensions and de-escalation skills and negotiation skills as well.
I'm seeing a lot of suggestions really around sort of how do we hold spaces where people feel comfortable coming and getting to know us. And so I just encourage everyone to look through that chat because there's so many creative and wonderful ideas in terms of how to involve parents and really bringing in their culture and their traditions and providing opportunities and also physical spaces for them to do that, whether it's like curating a cork board. I don't know what we're using these days. Is it? There's so many ways to display information.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that is a barrier for all of us is making sure, again, we keep going back to that it's not the same voices that we're hearing all the time, not the same people that we're inviting. And that means that we're not always doing stuff in the school building or from a school building, but it also means that we've got to go out into communities and build that relational trust in communities, right? And we have to be consistent. We have to follow through. We have to be persistent. It's not I asked you to complete the survey and you didn't, so oh well, right? And it's really figuring out who is still not visible, who still does not seem to be engaged, and find out why. And that takes some relationship building and detective work and persistence. And sometimes one of the things that I found to work really well with that is by building trust with one family, if you can focus on a few families, then the entire network ends up coming along, right? Because then that parent goes back as kind of the cultural broker to say, Jessica's legit. She's a good person. You're safe with her. You can talk to her. She's going to listen to what you have to say, right? And that takes time. This isn't something that just happens overnight. Building school community takes a lot of time and a lot of effort in that.
And I love that you're highlighting that and that, this idea of a warm handoff. There are many, many ways to achieve that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jessica, I'm going to cue you up for your next story because we have so many just wonderful topics to explore. So take us to our next one. Your next story is titled, "It Takes a Village." And this is what you learned about the value of amplifying parent and community funds of knowledge.
Which is exactly what I see happening in the chat, right? That whole idea of how do we bring people to the table? So, I was thinking about your last story, and it really draws on themes around who we're inviting to that table to begin with. And when you're developing programs, bringing in the local experts and the cultural brokers to the table really helps us design for equity. So it's not just asking afterwards how it worked for you, but really being intentional about making sure that we're designing from the beginning. So, as I keep hammering about in the work that I do, in me, myself fully included as you can tell from the stories that we're telling today, we do not have all the answers here, right? And as educational practitioners, sometimes we don't know what we don't know. And so one of the leadership roles that I have been privileged to hold during my educational career here is supporting families as their children enter into and access special education programming. And what I've come to find through that work is that sometimes there tends to be a mismatch between what a teacher or a school priority is for academic and emotional growth and the priorities and hopes and dreams of a parent. For example, schools are always worried about academic growth, test scores, right? Those sorts of things for a family. And when a family wants something different, they're often labeled as being idealistic or in denial. And when they're hesitant to embrace the programming that we're offering for their child, especially as they first enter into special education. And we don't always do a great job of defining terms and what we mean when we talk about them. So I think of the term inclusion as one example. We talk about inclusive practice, right? But I think parents and teachers often have different priorities for what that means for the student and for their family. And we also don't always train our teachers to support students with special needs. I would say specifically at the secondary level, where it becomes a little more challenging as the content increases. So I've had multiple experiences where school personnel end up being perceived as being inflexible, defensive, and quite frankly, not welcoming to a family and their student who are at the center of the discussion. But I've also had quite a few experiences where these tensions and stalemates end up being able to be resolved through honest conversation. But that makes me think, what if we were able to hijack the experience for families from the beginning so they didn't have to wait until there was an issue or pressure point when there's frustration and tensions are rising? What if we designed engagement to short circuit or at least mitigate these worries by setting up a proactive system? And the reason I asked that question is because I was able to have some experiences. I was able to have one experience that I can think of off the top of my head where we were able to do this. We had a family that wanted to enroll in our school. Their child was entering the 3rd grade, had autism, and was also nonverbal, and had never been in a formal school setting before. He had been in a specialized, very specialized one-on-one and very small group therapeutic setting for a number of years, but not full-time in a school. And they wanted to enroll him in our school where he would be fully included in the regular classroom. And so my teachers were really kind of nervous about this. They were very hesitant. And I was able to really listen to their concerns, and it became clear that, well, in theory, they thought it would be wonderful to welcome this child into their classroom. They were really actually not confident in their own support, their own skill set, and able to support his growth and development. And so what we realized very quickly is we didn't have the full expertise. And it made me worry that when we met with the family, that we would appear that we weren't welcoming this family into our community and into our classrooms, not because my staff and myself didn't believe we weren't passionate about including all kids, but because they had a real sense of hesitancy and lack of confidence, and that would be perceived as unwelcoming.
I think this is such a common situation, and it's so hard to feel vulnerable when you are holding a leadership position or you feel that you need to hold a leadership position. So what happened next? Because I think we can all relate to this.
Yeah. So I think the first thing we did was we acknowledged that we were excited to welcome Joey into our school, but there was a lot of things we wanted to learn and know about in order to do so well. We wanted to make sure we did it well and we took it seriously. So we structured a transition program that welcomed his parents to come and talk to us, specifically to the teachers, to introduce their child, who he was, his strengths, right? What he brings as a whole student, a whole child to the conversation or to a classroom, not really about what his disability was, but all the things he could do, not the things he couldn't do. And they told so many endearing stories, and they expressed their hopes and dreams for Joey. And they also took the time to explain why they thought this was the right program for him. And I think that this was really important for teachers to hear, going back to like, what do we think inclusion means or why we value it? The teachers the teachers were able to ask questions of the family, and they were able to talk to the family and share their expectations and how they ran their classrooms and how their philosophies for education and their communication styles. And we were able to say to the family, what would a successful year look like for you at the end of the year? And the family was really able to articulate what they were hoping to see for their son. And this really took some of the pressure off the teacher's shoulders, because what they heard the family say is, yes, we want him to grow academically, but our biggest push is for him to be fully immersed in a verbal environment where he can be around students and really get an opportunity to hear communication back and forth, rich dialogue, and be exposed to those sorts of things, because we think that will increase his own verbalization. Sure enough, it did, right? So that was really the priority for them, and that really helped. But we didn't just stop there. We also then welcomed his current educators and service providers into our building to teach us what they knew about Joey. And so they were able to talk about his strengths and needs from an academic and a behavioral point of view in their situations. They were able to talk about how to prompt verbal communication with him, how to anticipate triggers that could happen in the classroom based on past experiences. And this provided the teachers an opportunity to ask questions that maybe they didn't feel comfortable asking the family, or that the family wouldn't know because they hadn't provided this level of care for them. And the practitioners then were also welcomed into the classrooms to shadow the classroom setting. And so they could talk to the teachers about, okay, I know you have it set up this way, but let's talk about universal design that might be beneficial for all students, but also for Joey in your classroom. And so they then really also helped us decide, okay, we really want this, if verbal communication and interaction is important, we got to get the kids involved in the classroom. And so how do we support all the students to interact with Joey in authentic ways as well? So those were kind of the main steps that we took for this situation.
I think what's so notable about this moment, and like so many of the moments we've talked about, is that that if we can allow being in this state of unknowing or not quite being sure to be the thing that activates us to collaborate and to bring in more voices, we are creating a really great equation. And just that this state of not knowing was held, and that then you were able to bring in the parental voices and the community voices to really support this student. And I'm just wondering, in terms of making that something that we can repeat and implement in our own practices, what are some of the suggestions you have?
Yeah, I think my first suggestion is that I think as educators, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves that we're supposed to parents expect us to fix things, right? There's a problem and they want us to fix it, or there's an issue and we're supposed to fix it all on our own. And I think that when we are honest and say, we genuinely want to make the situation better, let's talk together and work as a team to get that done. And what don't we know? And I think the one thing that is really successful in doing that is really recognizing and honoring family funds of knowledge, family and community, I would say. So, we have families who have professional or academic knowledge about psychology, finance, law, medicine, social work. I mean, the example that I gave about bringing the medical team together to help me with the pandemic. Obviously, we have families that have those skill sets, but that's not the only knowledge that is invaluable in schools. We need to recognize that families have accumulated skills through life experiences, navigating new cultures, and these things can all be extremely valuable to the work that we do. And most importantly, and I think somebody mentioned it in the chat before, families have the best data on their own children. They are the experts on their strengths and their needs. And some of these we'll never see in an academic setting. We may never know that the child is amazing at karate, for example, because that's not something we do at school. And so it's really important that we honor different funds of knowledge. And we do this too by understanding what knowledge is missing. And that's important, to be honest and open to learning new things, ideas, techniques from others in our community, because they may see the problem or challenge through a different lens, right? And so it's important that we ask people to join our team to provide that knowledge that may be missing. And then once we have our team assembled, we need to make sure that we're really clear on what our goals are together, what our aim is going to be together, that we're doing that work together. Who needs to be in the room when we're making the decision, and what data are we going to collect? And there's both qualitative data, and those things happen when you're saying, like, maybe you're not counting how many verbalizations the child makes because it's not the IEP goal, but you're able to see, hey, at the beginning of the year, when this student would walk over to talk to Joey, he just turned and walked away. But I've noticed recently that he walks over and smiles and engages with that child. That's qualitative, like that's anecdotal, real life things that are happening that we need to celebrate, as well as that quantitative data. How's he doing in math? How's he doing in reading? In reading. What does his report card look like, right? All of those things. And most importantly, I would encourage everyone to revisit these goals periodically, not just once a year through an IEP process, but we make those updates based on new information, and those things can be done informally as well. And so I think we want to make sure that we're always taking that time to really honor the knowledge that our community members can bring to the table, and families, making sure we're working to get the right people in the room, and always working towards success.
I'm curious to hear from everyone on the call today. What are some things you do to sort of cultivate listening and family funds of knowledge, not just like at the start of the year or, at these key touch points, but are there ongoing ways that you're eliciting family observations and family insights? Are there habits or routines that you're putting in place to collect that feedback and to invite that feedback and insight? And go ahead and put it in the chat. Jessica, I know in other conversations, I see quarterly surveys. You've shared with me things that you've done with homework to make it more of a dialogue. Mm-hmm. Families can always share insights.
Absolutely. Just how long, noting how long something takes for you to complete or for your child to complete. Was it easy? Was it difficult? Was it just right? There's just different ways that you can quickly gather information from families, because they're the ones seeing it on the other end. And someone wrote in here, like, families are discounted or dismissed or ignored. And you're right. I don't think that we mean to do that. We're not being malicious about it, but it's that idea of like, well, we see them a different way. And I would often say to my teachers and to families, of course you see them in a different way. School looks much different than home, right? And so I've had kids that struggle more at home because there's not routines and structures. And they say, oh, I have such trouble and blah, blah, blah. And I'm so frustrated, but they're doing really well at school, not just the other way around. So if we know that those things can be different and that people bring in different strengths, we ought to be able to look at that and say, what is working? Why is that working at home? Or why are we seeing that at home? And how do we make sure that we're bringing and amplifying that and building up on people's strengths in school as well?
We're getting so many great ideas along these lines, like things related to parent advisory boards, direct reach outs, parent surveys. There was something earlier and then it went away. Hold on, let me go back up. Someone mentioned something about, having parents and caregivers lead workshops.
Yes.
Love that. Community conversations. And those can happen in person, or they can happen, online, or in meetup groups.
Right.
Virtual
help design workshops, even if they're not comfortable leading it. But they may also have colleagues or connections, right? Where I think we need this, and I know someone who will do it for us, right? I mean, there's lots of ways to do that. We don't have to do it all on our own. It's a big lift, and we have communities that will help us do that. All right, so let's talk about our last story, because so far we've shared several stories that highlight assumptions that we've made as educators in setting priorities and agendas about family needs, and about the best ways to make decisions, about content. And we've talked about how these assumptions assumptions kept us from fully engaging with families. But now I think it's a time to share a story that highlights another type of assumption that gets made and can interfere with family engagement. And that could be parental assumptions about us as educators and administrators. So Rebecca, I think you have a good example of this.
I did.
With
I
us.
did. So a while back, ParentPowered was creating custom family engagement content for a very large district. And as part of this, we hosted a listening session with about 30 or 40 members of the Parent Policy Council. So we wanted to know, what were ways they wanted to partner with the school to support student learning. And we had been talking for quite a while, and parents had shared so many great ideas. But then a parent stood up and they appeared visibly frustrated. And they said, well, all of this stuff is going to be hard because I can't engage with my kid's school at all because my kid's teacher doesn't like me. I try and they never want to talk to me. They won't give me the time of day. And suddenly all of these parents started nodding and saying, me too. And I was like, oh boy, we have some serious work to do.
Oh my goodness. It sounds to me like there was a complete mismatch here between our intentions as educators, right? And our impact that we're having on families. So my guess is that these teachers were not even aware that this was happening. And so this can lead to some real obstacles for genuine and proactive engagement.
Absolutely. And to go back to this moment, right, and what happened, it, like so many of the stories we have shared, actually, when I think back, really all of the stories we shared, this moment really rattled me into a listening and learning space, because these parents were totally right. If they didn't feel valued by the school, none of the engagement work was going to happen. All of their ideas, it weren't going to work if they didn't feel valued by the school. So in that listening session, I threw out my set of scripted questions, and I started asking really, really specific questions to build my understanding of what exactly was happening during these moments that parents were finding so off-putting. So I kind of said, okay, take me through these parent-teacher interactions like they're a scene in a movie. I want all the details. What happened right before, what happened during, and what happened after. Well, what came out as we were really unpacking these moments is that parents and caregivers were attempting to connect with teachers right at drop-off, right as teachers were attempting to set up the room and connect with students. And it seemed like they didn't want to engage with parents because at that moment, they couldn't engage with parents. It was not the right time. But as we talked, there was even more contributing to parents' negative impressions, because upon further reflection with parents, they also shared that they never felt their own teachers liked them. Basically, the parents and caregivers were entering with anxieties about teachers and about school, and then they were feeling like those worries were validated when the teachers didn't seem to want to connect. So I just want to sort of spend a minute talking about what we did about it. So our medium is text messaging. And what we did is we carefully wrote and sequenced a set of messages aimed at alleviating parental anxieties about partnering with the school and offering strategies for connecting with educators. So the first thing we did is we sent a message letting families know that it is common to feel nervous about a new school year and to feel unsure about how to connect with the teachers, because we really want to normalize that so many of us have these anxieties. Then we let families know just how much their voice matters, that they have valuable insights on their child that helps not only their child, but helps the teacher teach their child and helps the entire school community. And then we sent very specific messages on strategies for connecting. What are the right moments? What are the different ways? And even offering conversation starters to really bridge that initial communication, which can feel really vulnerable.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, when we don't take into account that others may have had traumatic experiences with schooling, we're really missing an opportunity to break down barriers and engage every family equitably. So you told us about some of the ways you address this situation here, but what advice do you have for others to break down these assumptions that families may have about us?
Yeah, this is This is really critical here. So think one of the most important things we can all do is we can apply a trauma-informed lens to our partnership efforts. And this would mean being sensitive to the impact of trauma on others and on yourself, and really allowing that sensitivity to guide you in your work with families. Because it's going to be this that leads you to really, really reflect deeply about families' past experiences. It's going to lead you to create interactions and environments that help families feel good and self-regulated during your interactions with them. It's going to lead you to work to really avoid situations that could potentially activate or re-traumatize a family. So in that example where a family member is trying to connect with the teacher as the teacher is setting up, that moment of reflection, I wonder if this family has had negative experiences and feels uncomfortable around connecting, instead of just sort of saying, I can't talk now, would be really saying, you know what, I'm setting up the classroom, so this isn't a great moment, but here's when I'm going to call you. And I'm really looking forward to connecting, right? Like that little shift would have made a huge difference in avoiding that re-traumatization for a family who already felt disenfranchised by the school. Like everything, right? The more you get to know families, the more you're going to know how to facilitate those comfortable interactions. But also, like we've been discussing, there are things we can do before we know families to really help everyone feel welcomed and included, and to really avoid activating that stress response in families. So we're paving the way for partnership. So we've been talking about building comfort through strength-based communication and being very clear on just how much families matter to your school and on ways they can connect. But there are other ways that we can set the stage for comfort and engagement. So for one, we can think of the front office of your building as the place that first impressions are formed, right? For those families that learned in their own lives that school is not a place for me, this is an opportunity to begin shifting that belief. So consider putting signs around your front office that welcome families in their home language. Consider letting families curate a bulletin board or display shelves with things that they've made at home or artifacts that are meaningful to them, like family recipes, for example. If possible, you might have some music playing in the morning and choose a playlist that represents the families you serve. And then sort of look around, like, are there places that families can informally gather in the school, outside of this school, or even virtually? And this leads to another key contributor to early comfort and family engagement, right? When you can encourage families to connect with each other and build their own sense of community, all those good community feelings come to be associated with your school, right? So when you host a workshop or event, or when you have conferences or performances or sporting events, consider adding in that informal time for families to get to know each other. In one of the schools that I worked in, we made a sign and it read Stony Brook Meetup. And it was like a little plastic sign on a post. And if you were a parent that went to that school and you were heading to the park or to a sporting event, we encouraged you to bring that sign with you and put it next to the place you were going to be hanging out, so that other parents could be like, oh, that's another family who goes to the school my kid goes to, and could just like start informally meeting up with each other and connecting with each other. I want to just highlight one other strategy that we love using to build a sense of community, and that sense of community extends beyond the parent-teacher relationship into family relationships and outward as far as your community extends, and that is storytelling. We've been doing this the whole time, and one of the reasons we choose storytelling is because it allows us to find points of intersection. It allows us to be human and to be vulnerable together. And these are the things that we can connect around and that allow us to feel that we're part of a community. So if you have an opportunity to bring families together, to tell stories, to start off a presentation with the story of the best story of your worst parenting moment. I think it's someone, I can't remember who I was hearing speak, someone very famous, and they said, do that. I thought that was great advice. So in the interest of just switching to Q&A momentarily, Jessica, can you sort of recap the main things we've highlighted from our storytelling today?
Yes. And one thing I did want to say, Rebecca, as you were talking, that made me think about is that I think that we live in a world where sometimes schools feel very burdened that they have to be everything to everyone. Teachers have to be everything to everyone. It can be very overwhelming. And what I like to think about is that it's okay for professionals to have boundaries, very clear boundaries about this is not a good time. I'm welcoming kids, or I have to be home at 4:00. My daughter has a doctor's appointment, right? There's nothing wrong with those, or that you should feel apologetic about it. But a boundary that doesn't have the next part, that softer part of here's what does work for me, is an obstacle, right? So saying like, I can't talk to you now is an obstacle. Saying my planning period is period 3, and that is when I have time to talk to, when I look forward to talking to parents or answering emails or whatever it is. That's a boundary, a healthy boundary, but it also allows people access points in. And so we want to be really careful that when we're giving our boundaries and we're practicing those, because we should have them for our own health and sanity, is that but we're not making them an obstacle boundary. We're making them an accessible boundary. That's all. So as we talk today, hopefully our stories really highlighted these ideas. We want to make sure that we are building systems that will gather diverse feedback as much as possible for our families. We want to make sure that we're recognizing and meeting families where they are. We always want to strive to identifying the invisible and making it visible for families, scaffolding family engagement, the same way we do for our students at school, right? We want to make sure that we're honoring family gathering and honoring family and community funds of knowledge in our classrooms, in our schools, and in our districts. We always want to look through a trauma-sensitive lens. I saw someone in a chat say that the trauma is everywhere and we've all experienced it. And so when we use that lens, it does then allow us to cultivate a community of comfort, a strong sense of communication, and all of that ties together to building a strong, healthy, and vibrant community.
Sherry, I know we're going to open it up for Q&A now. I also wanted to ask you, I feel like if this chat could be like somehow captured and shared out with everyone, like the number of brilliant ideas that were popped into this chat, I want to save them forever and ever and ever. So whatever I can do to help cut and paste stuff into a shareable doc,
I think we can download. I know we can download it. I think that anybody can, but just in case, Fred will download it on our end. And when we send out the slides and recordings to NAFSCI members, that'll be part of it. And we'll also share that with Cafe so they can put it on their website as well.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. So here we have so many great questions, you guys. Let's just dive right in because you guys covered so much information and it was spot on, all of it. But this was a really good question that came in early on from Bobby Taylor. Bobby wants to know, they said you sent out a survey and then followed up with families who asked for it. But what about the families who didn't complete the survey in the first place? How do you connect with the most disengaged families or parents?
Yeah, so full disclosure, in this particular situation I talked about, I was at a small independent school. So it was really easy to track. There's 20 kids in this first grade classroom, 18 of them turned back the survey. And if you're asking for an anonymous, then I don't really know who the two parents were, right? But that's a pretty high rate of return, something to that effect. But when we're in larger districts, when we're talking about like huge pieces of information, things are anonymous, it gets really difficult to make sure that we're not hearing from the same people over and over again. And so I think that one of the things that we want to do is it goes back to building that sense of community. Number one, if we're asking for information from families, then we need to follow up with how we used it, right? So that families are constantly getting the message of like, when you share, I'm going to listen to what it is. And we want to make sure, obviously, that those things are accessible. And we can also work with community partners. So if we have a place in the community where families are going for resources, asking them to encourage families to take the survey or take it with them, or, Sippy-san, like that, lots of people, churches, religious affiliations, anybody that we could get in the community, it's really important that we get feedback. And so we're like branching out and asking lots of people to ask for that feedback. Or again, going back to those cultural brokers. So if you think that it's a situation where like a certain neighborhood, right, a street, that you're not getting a lot of input from a family group, or there's a cultural group that seems to be a little more reserved, trying to figure out how you build some relationships within that group and having them serve as cultural workers to say, here's why this is important. And I think it goes without saying that you're always making sure that what you're sending out is accessible language wise and culturally for families. And maybe we didn't say that explicitly, but that is something that you obviously would need to do in order to get the most input back. What do you think, Rebecca?
I mean, all of that. And I would just add, anytime you can add a survey onto a pre-existing moment for a family, where are they already going to be? Is there already something they're required to do? And can you just add 1 or 2 questions? Also recommend just making it easy. Like, you can always follow up on a multiple choice survey with open-ended questions to learn more, but a multiple choice gives families a really easy point of entry, and then you can follow with an open-ended response and offer for sharing more feedback.
Yeah, that's great. I've been to do school assessments where I've actually had a clipboard and a stack of surveys and walked the car rider line and just stopped to talk to each family that was waiting to pick up their kids. They weren't doing anything else. And so they were happy to fill out any surveys because I was right there, and it gave them something to do.
Right.
Another great. Sorry, go ahead, Jessica.
The only thing I was going to add to that is, again, we're not relying on one individual data point, though, to make decisions, right? And so when you have multiple data points that you can bring those things together, it's not that you're doing a survey and you're saying, well, 8 people filled it out, so we're going to make decisions based on that. You know what I mean? You really have to be looking at where do we see commonality through multiple data points. When I talk to the family in the car line, maybe they're not filling out a survey, but I'm informally asking them the questions to see what matches. Then you also have those opportunities too in more informal ways. And that data can come back too and say, yeah, what I'm seeing on this survey reflects what the 5 families that I talked to in the car line today that don't always come in and participate. They're waiting in the car line for their kid though. And so I made sure to connect with them and ask them a couple of these questions. And this does match with what they're saying, even if they didn't fill out the survey, if that makes sense.
Yeah, great. So there's another great question from Jordan Cruz. Any suggestions on how to make parent meetings engaging and attended?
So I have a couple things I'll just quickly throw out there. Kid performances, kid displays of work, like when their kid is the driver behind making this exciting, everybody loves seeing visible, when we make learning visible, when we show them what it is their child has done, something their child has said, if the child can be there helping to lead the conference or the workshop. Food is also a biggie. And making sure you're breaking down all those barriers. So you've got childcare there, and you've got transportation assistance and multiple ways to participate. So that if you can't show up in person, you can Zoom in later, or you can watch it on demand. So those are some other things you might try.
Yeah, Rebecca, I was going to say that too. I think if it's important, if this is something that's important enough that we are asking teachers or administrators to give up their time with their families in the evening, as well as families, right, to rearrange their evening schedules to be there, then it's important enough that we have a way to get it to families who couldn't be there, right? And so whether it's because they don't feel comfortable coming in the school, they have a job in the evenings, they have multiple children that have multiple activities in different places, and it's just not the highest on their priority list. by making sure that we're following up and saying, hey, we're sorry we missed you. Here's the information for you. We're sending the message that what we're doing is important. So I think that's really important. I would also agree with always bringing the kids in. We ended up turning over some of the things that we were doing with parents. I had one school that I can think of that was having some issues with chronic absenteeism, and they wanted to really reach out to fathers. And so they started a basketball tournament that they did for a couple Saturday mornings between kids and fathers. And everybody showed up to participate in the basketball tournament, but they spent the first 20 minutes before they started, or at halftime of the tournament, talking about attendance and why it matters. So they got them in by basketball, and then they talked about what they needed to talk about. So I think that's another way to think about being creative about how you're hooking them in.
And actually, I love this strategy. Like, so let's say you want to have a parent only workshop, have the kids come as well. And you've got them doing learning to act out a book in another room with someone else. So in other words, like a book like Caps for Sale or The Mitten, where they can all be monkeys and, and they're acting it out. So then you can bill it as learn a little and watch your child perform with no rehearsals required. So you do your workshop, and then in come the kids who have been in this other room and they perform for you. Yeah. And it's a reader's theater moment where it's something they just threw together then and there, but it adds this element of joy. Yep. And I did a literacy workshop once where the kids read their stories aloud and the parents acted them out in the moment. They'd never heard it before. And it was like so fun. And yeah. Like a huge.
I would attend that. I would totally
share you would. Yeah.
I worked with a district in Leavenworth, Kansas, and they had the most incredible idea. They had an event for families of 5th grade students who were moving up to 6th grade. And so they didn't even market it to the families. They marketed it to the kids and said, we're having an escape room. We're calling it Escape from 5th grade. But the only way you can come is if you bring an adult caregiver with you. And they had 100% turnout because there was so much buzz on campus about how much fun that was going to be. Kids wanted to be there. And when they came, the kids were in the library doing their escape room activities while the parents were learning about the transition to middle school. And it was magical.
Yeah. I think it's not about doing more sometimes. It's about being efficient with the time that we have. And every district, every school knows when they get highest attendance. So capitalizing on that and figuring out ways that you can engage families when you have them.
Yeah. We have to be better at marketing. We just do.
Yes.
There were a lot of questions, Jessica, about the stages of immigrant parents and where that came from. Could you remind everyone where they could find that information?
That is work by Young Chon Han, and I think the research was Han and Love, and I think it's from 2005. But it really is moving from cultural survivor to learner, and then becoming like a more of a leader in your community. So kind of thinking about like, I'm here and I'm in survival mode. I have to figure out how to get a job, pay my bills, transportation, learning the new language, learning new culture, and that whole acculturation process. And then when you're settled and you're comfortable, then you can eventually move into leadership, but recognizing where families are on that spectrum.
Mm-hmm. I think we just have time for one more, and I think this is a really important one. This is from Don Burks. I am at a large urban district. How may it be different when you're working with 60 to 100 buildings? In my role at the district level, where would be the best place to begin outside of doing surveys?
Yeah, right. That's a great question.
I mean, one thing is to do sort of an audit of just like, where are people coming together? Because you might find it is Friday night football, or you might find it's in the gym up the road, and squeezing in on the sidelines and just putting a pop-up tent, making yourself available to conversations. I think that meeting people where they are is always a wonderful place to start. And when you're like, you've got multiple districts, are there things that are bringing people together outside of their districts? that can be a great place to really, at least for the in-person stuff, to begin gathering feedback and forging relationships.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think more than anything, the larger the district, the more I think this is true, the larger the number of students and buildings is at the district level is really focusing on making sure that we have systemic and equitable and consistent opportunities. So it doesn't mean that every single school has to do every single event the same way. Every school has its own culture and character, and we want to honor that. But mapping out what are schools doing, what are the essentials that everyone should be doing, and what can that look like to build community in each smaller place, because building community on large scale means that people in each smaller group feel that they belong. Right. It's not, and the district should still be doing things to make sure that they have advisories and focus groups, a community of champions where they're spreading their message out and talking about initiatives and how that relates to families and how families can do that, whether it's a virtual coffee talk or bringing people in for an hour, really thinking about all the different businesses within your district that you need to be in touch with so that they know what your initiatives are and they can help support what is their role in supporting the work that you're doing, or what would they like to see happening in the school, or what do they need help with. But I think, again, it's a systemic approach, because I think what happens sometimes in larger districts is it becomes kind of scattered, and this school does this really well and this school over here isn't, and families know what everybody else is doing. Right. And they talk about it. And so you want it to be, I feel safe and secure. And when I move to the next level, the transitions in larger districts are really important that we get those right with families, in my opinion.
Yeah. Thank you both so much. This has been an incredible session. I feel like everyone probably learned a lot. I know I did. So I'm really grateful to have you here. And I just want to say thank you so much. Couple of quick housekeeping things before we go. A lot of people want to know how to get copies of the chat and the recording and the slides and all of that. If you're a NAFSCI member, we'll just send it to you. So please join NAFSCI today. There's a QR code on the screen. If you're not yet a member, you can join. Also, all of this will be available through Cafe because they are a partner with us on this website. So I encourage everyone to visit their website and check out not just these recordings, but all their other resources as well. And the amazing ParentPowered, which is the home of Ready for K, tons and tons of resources available on their site as well. So please check that out. Also, coming up very soon is our National Family Engagement Summit. So we partner with Successful Innovations on that project. It's going to be an amazing opportunity to grow your professional network, attend the disco ball, and go to some really great sessions. So please join us there if you're able. There's also virtual sessions if you're not available to come to Kansas City, but it's a real fun town. So I hope you do. And I'm going to turn it over to Nikivier today, who is going to wind things up for us.
Thank you, Sherry. And thank you to everyone here for joining us today. Mm-hmm. Please take a few moments to share your feedback for today's webinar. I'm going to place everything in the chat right now. You can find the link below. I'll send it again because compliments were flying in. Hold on, let me try it again. There we go. Thank you all.
We all got to keep talking at this conference. I just like really the brilliance that is in this chat. And I hope we get to see everyone in person.
Yeah, Rebecca and Jessica are both going to be there. And I think Nikivier, are you coming too? Yeah, we'll all be there. So come see all of us.
Right, we'll keep talking.
Yeah, we'll definitely keep talking. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Stay safe out there. And hopefully we'll see you in Kansas City.
Bye.